Okay guys, welcome to my first ever Kerbal Space Program video. Today's video is pretty complicated because I started a save a couple weeks ago, and in today's video we're going to be doing a mission from Kerbin to Ike, landing on Ike, taking off, redocking, and landing on Duna. And this mission is going to get us about 3,000 science, which is a good amount because I have not fully unlocked the tech tree. And so right now we're in the middle of our ascension. We've already dropped our first tanks, which are there to just give us a tiny boost of Delta V. But it wasn't too powerful, and then we just had some Septratons boost them away. There we're ditching our exterior boosters, which were just a couple mainsail engines. And now you can see we are slowly and we cut out our engine because our apparatus height is at where we want it. Now we're going to create our maneuver node that is going to put us in just an orbit that's just slightly inside Kerbin's sphere of influence, because doing this makes it incredibly easy to escape Kerbin when it's time to do it for that part of the mission, because we only have to slightly burst our engines, and that's very helpful with our singular nuclear engine, because that has a terrible thrust to weight ratio. And now you can see us just slowly tweaking and making sure that burn is completely perfect, because I want this to be as simple as possible. And we're currently doing this with our Mastodon stage because we put so many Separatrons on that you will, well, I'm able to completely detach that and disorbit it from the top of our um, orbit, which is kind of cool, making it so I don't have to reorbit myself, which is helpful. So let me give you a basic layout of this rocket. Um we've got our mainsail engine boosters, which have two Rokamax jumbo tanks. Those are what get us our big main boost up into orbit. And then we have small peripheral tanks, which pump into those mainsail tanks, which give us just a bit more delta V, which is very helpful. Then we have our tanks that we use when we're going to the orbit, which are connected to our mastodons. They're the biggest tank physically possible. So those tanks were helpful because they have a lot of storage, and I love the Mastodon engine because it has an amazing thrust to weight ratio, and it's incredibly great. So then after that, you can see me creating my maneuver node now. We're going to be using our nuclear stage, which consists of, I think, 10 of the Mark 1 liquid fuel fuselages, which the best thing about the nuclear engines is they're so efficient and they don't require oxidizer, which is a nice tidbit of information if you ever try to do a deep space mission. They're the best engine to use, second to the ion engines, which are just very slow. That's their downside. And the thing with the nuclear engines is they have very little thrust, so your burns would be very long. And in this video, I'm using a mod called Kerbal Alarm Clock, which is how I'm getting my transfer window to be the correct window. You can see me opening it up here. This is how I'm setting an automatic warp to my first maneuver, which is going to put me on an encounter with Duna. And from this encounter, we are going to be um, warping around and also encountering Ike. Because when I was planning this maneuver, I made it so I just completely forgot what I was saying. So, when you're executing these burns, what you need to do when you're encountering your other planet, what I suggest you do, you hit focus view on that planet so you can see your predicted orbit. That way, fine-tuning it is very easy at the beginning, because fine-tuning your orbit around the planet can take a lot of fuel, and if you can get it very close to a good encounter in the beginning, it would make it a lot easier to circularize your orbit and do whatever else you wanted to do there. So when I was doing this part of the mission, it was pretty difficult because I was not 100% sure what I was doing because this is only like this is only like the third time I've encountered a moon before. And so I've never encountered a moon that was on a different celestial body, which is an even bigger challenge. So doing this for the first time is on my first YouTube video. I was really stressed out and I was thinking I was going to mess up, but somehow I went through the steps and I did successfully make a good encounter with Duna, and I even got an encounter that was almost perfect and got me straight on an encounter with Ike, but I accidentally messed up. You can see right now that I had the orbit planned and all the maneuvers planned to perfectly circularize me around Ike, but I didn't execute the burns correctly, so I kind of had to scrap those and redo all of these orbits, which was kind of sad, but I didn't really care that much because I have I had a lot of time. So when you're doing these types of missions, normally you if you were doing something like an SSTO, you would want to be very fuel efficient with your burns. But I had plenty of fuel, and I was just gonna go with what I had to do. So as I was coming around, I used as much fuel as I needed to get myself fully captured around Duna and even encountered with Ike. I think I did it in 2 burns. Took me to capture and um get to Ike. Actually, no, I did it in 1 burn, but it was a very long burn. That was the only downside because with the nuclear engine, if you have a single nuclear engine, your an average burn time would maybe be 2 to 10 minutes, depending on what you're doing. If you were doing like a interplanetary transfer burn, it could be normally around 8 to 10 minutes. But if you were trying to go to like Joule or something, it could be like a 30-minute burn, which is kind of annoying. Which is why I use the feature where if you hold Alt while you press period to increase your time warp speed, it does a physics warp, which actually lets you speed up the time that it takes your burns to do, which is very helpful for long burns and makes it less tedious when doing them. Now you can see me right now approaching my final encounter burn, which I'm going to use to encounter Ike, and I kind of overshot it this first time, but I did go back and tweak it, and it did work, so I'm happy. I'm kind of surprised I got this encounter first try. Normally it takes me a couple tries, and I didn't even have to quick save for this part of the mission. And I got a relatively wonky encounter just because it was almost a perfect circle, not a very straight line, which helped with the circularization, but it was kind of tedious to circularize and get up in the first place because it was so wonky that I couldn't really get to where I needed to go easily. So I kind of had to do a plane change so I could get my orbit, and then my periapsis was so high I had to do my um orbital insertion burn, and then I had to do another burn to bring down my apoapsis, which is was where my periapsis was, and it was difficult, to say the less. It was kind of annoying, but it wasn't that bad. There were bigger struggles I had to face later on in this mission, and I have put 4 of the biggest antennas in the game on my spaceship because I have never done a interplanetary mission. Actually, I had, but the first time I did an interplanetary mission, I didn't have enough antennas to actually reach back to Kerbin. Just in case I needed to crash land somewhere, I wanted to be able to transmit my science and get at least some science points for it. And also, it's good to have that sort of thing. I have a small array of batteries, and then I have 4 solar panels that are the retractable solar panels, just in case I need to do an aero brake, which I didn't need to do surprisingly, but it's good to have them just in case if you might have needed to do something like that. Um, and my lander is two of the Mark 1 lander cans stacked on top of each other with a Science Junior and then a fuel tank. And then I had 4 columns of the Oscar B fuel tanks. And then the bottom of the Oscar B fuel tanks each had a Spark engine, and then I had a Terrier engine at the bottom of the stack. There were some SAS wheels inside of the tower of Oscar B engines, and then I had a battery at the top with a shielded docking port because Duna does have an atmosphere, it's just a very thin one. And then I also have parachutes to easier land on Duna. And those parachutes do get used, and they're pretty much what I base my entire descent on. I've got every science unit I've unlocked, which is almost every science unit in the entire game. And at the time of recording this, I had not purchased the Breaking Ground DLC, and it made it so I couldn't get the surface sample parts, so I didn't use those. I'm kind of sad. I would have gotten a lot more science if I had the ability to, but sadly I couldn't. I'm not that bad. So now you can see me, I de-docked my lander, and now I'm deorbiting it so I can actually land. You just saw the mothership fly away. We'll be redocking with that. We left Jebediah on the mothership, and then Valentina and Bob are going to the surface. We brought Bob so we can reset the science, and Valentina so we can create maneuver nodes, because if you look in the top left, you can see that we don't have any connection to the Kerbal Space Center, because we do not have connection to the mothership, which would have acted as a relay in a perfect scenario. And you can see me now landing. I was going very fast horizontally, so I kind of had to tweak my speed by just pointing a little bit past retrograde, and I kind of came in a little too fast, so I kind of just had to go up a little bit. And then you can see me tip right here. That was killing off the rest of the horizontal speed. And so I was slowly touching down. I touched down at a speed of about 2 meters per second, and it was a pretty smooth touchdown. We tipped a little bit, but other than that, it was pretty fine. And we didn't tip too much. We stayed on our 4 landing legs. The springs were strong enough. And now we're going to plant our flag after we take these surface samples. Yep. And we're going to name it. I always name my flags the biome that I planted them in. That way I know which biomes I've already been to. And here we've got our takeoff. It was a very quick landing. This takeoff took me multiple tries to get the right takeoff I wanted, but I did eventually get it. And so I did my takeoff, and we're going to do our rendezvous using our mothership instead of using our lander, because our lander was running very low on fuel, and there's no way we could do a complete rendezvous using the lander alone. And so after I complete this orbital insertion burn, I will use my mothership and switch to it to complete the rest of the rendezvous. This rendezvous was pretty finicky for me to set up because I didn't have a good launch time. So it took me a lot of phasing orbits. It took me 4 days of waiting for the burn to actually complete, 4 in-game days, obviously. And since I had such a low orbit, the game would only let me warp so fast, so it took me like 30 minutes in real life, which was annoying, but I just kind of did it anyway. So right now you can see me planning out my maneuver, and now I'm going to warp to it so we can actually complete the maneuver. And I just cut out all the footage of me waiting because no one really wants to see that. And so now we're doing our warp, and this warp is going to get us on a almost direct encounter. Now this is where we're setting up our burn to get a perfect encounter. We had a very good separation on this. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was quite great. And then we're using Kerbal Alarm Clock to get us warped to our maneuver. And now we got to go around one more orbit, which will get us to our encounter. And then you can see me using a trick I learned from Matt Lown. Shout out to him. I use the trick where you can swap vessels, turn on their SAS, and have them point target, and then they'll kind of point to each other, but you have to set the target to the docking port and control from the docking port, and then they'll point to each other. which makes docking 2 ships in this fashion really easy. I lowered the speed so you could see the actual connection point, and now I'm transferring my crew and grabbing all my science and putting it into the mothership, just in case I crash when I'm landing on Duna. And I didn't crash, so I'm happy with that. And you can see the 4 antennas here, and right now I'm transferring fuel. This was a tedious process because I had a lot of fuel that I needed to transfer, but it took me a while. I did eventually get it done. It just I brought oxidizer tanks, which were just normal rocket fuel tanks that I emptied all the liquid fuel out, so they only held rocket oxidizer. Sorry, I'm not good at English. And so I encountered the fuel transfer glitch a couple times. So you saw the screen go black. That was if you quick load and then quick save and then quick load the game, it kind of reboots it a little. So the fuel transfer glitch goes away, and you can see me being OCD and organizing all my fuel windows, so it's all perfect. Then I just pull up the different oxidizer tanks, drain them, and then I pull liquid fuel from the nuclear stage to also drain into the lander, which I do put all my excess liquid fuel back into the nuclear stage because I didn't need to, but it's always good to have as much as you can. So right now you can see me warping to my exit burn. So I'm not sure that's the right terminology, but I'm calling it that anyway. So this is going to get us on a pretty low periapsis actually for Duna, which I liked because it was made um, landing and circularizing a lot easier. Mainly circularizing because my periapsis was already low enough, and all I needed to do was lower my apoapsis. So now you can see me lowering my apoapsis, and we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to transfer Valentina and Bob into the lander. We're going to de-dock it. We're going to cover up our docking port. That way we can have a bit more aerodynamic support. And then we're going to boost our engines and deorbit ourselves. So, um, next, and when we were deorbiting ourselves, we did do a somewhat powered descent because I noticed I was coming down way too fast and my parachutes were not going to be able to deploy because if you're moving too fast, your parachutes can't deploy. So I kind of engaged those spark engines to give us a bit more thrust, and then that those slowed me down enough, and then the parachutes did deploy. And then right as I touched down, I burnt the engines a little bit to bring our speed very low. Now you can kind of see me waiting. I don't know why I waited here, but I did. And then everything's ready. I de-docked it, closed the docking port. Now you can see me pointing retrograde. You saw the spark engines firing, which helped us lower our periapsis as well. And now we are just going to crash ourselves into the planet, but luckily we didn't actually crash. We landed safely. All of the Kerbals were not harmed in the making of this video. And you can see me coming down for our touchdown here. There's the fire of the engine to slow us down. Our drogue chutes deploy, our main chutes deploy. You can see us tapping the engine to slow our speed to a very low speed. We're going at about 11 meters per second for this landing. And then you can see me doing the landing. It was a very rough landing. I didn't do a very good job. But now we're just collecting all our science because that's why we came here, to get lots of science, and planting our flag. I designed that flag myself. I'm pretty proud of it. I tried to think of bad puns for Kerbal Space Program, and I'm pretty impressed with the terrible pun that I thought of. It was a very bad pun. I named my science save Valentina Delta V because V. And this ascent also took me a couple tries, but I did eventually get it, and those spark engines were very helpful to give me the extra thrust boost that I needed. And now you can see me preparing for my orbital insertion. And I believe for this one, I did actually do the rendezvous using the lander, which is what most people would normally do in a mission like this. So we successfully rendezvous, and everything goes perfectly swimmingly. I did a not bad job planning out this encounter. I think I did it in 2 orbits and got a great encounter. I think it was like 0.1, and my closing speed was very low, which was great. So I used the same trick with the setting your SAS to point target and then having them point to themselves. It was very helpful, and I'm glad I learned this. It made all my missions that I've ever done a lot easier. And now you can kind of see me kind of failing to get close enough because I accidentally burnt my engine. Now I'm just kind of slowing myself down, opening these docking ports, pointing target, and then I'm doing the same thing on this other side. I slowed the footage down so you can more see what I'm doing. And now I'm just going to burn towards them. I kind of missed because I forgot to set SAS target on this ship. So then it does successfully dock the second time. We transfer all of our liquid fuel back into the mothership, deorbit the lander because it will be crashing, but don't worry, we did not forget to bring our trusty Kerbals back onto the mothership, and Bob brought the science with him. Now we're about to deorbit our mothership, so we're setting our SAS to retrograde. We will burn the engines. I forgot to disable the spark engines and the Terrier engine on the lander, so we were being very inefficient with our fuel because the Terrier was pointing reverse of the nuclear engine. But we fixed that, and then we deorbited the lander and put ourselves back in orbit, and then we created a maneuver that would get us out of Duna. And then when I was planning my Kerbin encounter, I was just being kind of lazy. I didn't want to have to do a capture. So when I was planning my encounter, I just made it encounter the center of the planet, so when I encountered, I'd crash. But I have plenty of parachutes on my command pod, so I don't crash, obviously. I safely land. Now you can see me warping because I'm doing the burn. I'm using the same warp trick. And now we plan out the maneuver, and now we're waiting for our encounter. We do a slight burn to fix our maneuver to get it absolutely perfect. We encounter the planet. We close up all the stuff just for cleanliness sake, and then we detach ourselves. These ablative heat shields are very powerful, so I had way too much ablator. And you can see me deploy all my parachutes. We slowly touch down. This is very sped up because the touchdown was very slow. 3 meters per second on Kerbin, which is very slow. And then we touch down, and we look at our science. We got 3,400 science. Now we go to the research center and buy all of the stuff that I have not bought, but not really. We just buy all the stuff from the 2 levels that I haven't, and then the highest 2 levels, we kind of debate what we wanted to get, but we end up getting a small amount of remote control stuff. Thank you for watching.